My partner, Alex, and I had been dreaming of a place far from the city for years, a quiet farmhouse surrounded by fields and forest. When we finally found it, tucked away in a small countryside town, it felt like a miracle. The house was older than anything I'd ever lived in, with peeling white paint, a wraparound porch, and wide windows that looked out over acres of untouched land. It was perfect. Except the locals warned us that the property had a history, though no one would say what. We didn't think much of it. A little gossip wouldn't scare us away. The first week was everything we imagined, unpacking boxes, making the place feel like ours, planting flowers along the front porch. Alex and I even adopted a black lab puppy we named Rusty, who immediately made himself at home. The first odd moment came almost immediately. On our second evening, while hanging lights on the porch, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the tree line across the field. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, but the sun had just set, and no one else lived nearby. The figure didn't move, didn't wave, just stared. Rusty growled, I squinted, and then it was gone. I chalked it up to nerves. We'd moved far from the city. I was imagining things. But over the next few nights, I noticed small signs. Rusty would growl at empty corners of the living room. A note appeared on the porch one morning, written in messy, almost childish handwriting. Not again. We had no idea what it meant, and there was no one around. We told ourselves it was harmless, a prank from the few local kids who sometimes biked past the property. But then things escalated. One night, around 2:48 a.m., Alex woke me. He was staring at the kitchen window. "There's someone outside," he whispered. We crept over quietly. A man stood in the field beyond the porch, about 20 feet from the house, motionless. He wore a gray hoodie, his head tilted slightly as if examining us. He didn't move for almost 10 minutes. When I blinked, he was gone. We checked Rusty. The puppy had disappeared from the porch, though we hadn't let him off the leash. By week 6, the presence around our house had shifted from unsettling to actively threatening. The shadows no longer lingered at the edge of the fields. Now, figures appeared at the tree line just beyond the porch, visible from the kitchen window. They never moved during the day, only at night, but their positions always seemed deliberate, as if they were planning something. Rusty refused to go outside without me, growling at empty air, and I started sleeping with my phone in hand, ready to call for help. One evening, Alex suggested we try a neighborhood walk, thinking that maybe exposure to the few locals might calm our nerves or give us a clue about who could be doing this. The town was small and quiet, and the residents were cordial but evasive. Questions about the farmhouse earned nothing but sideways glances. "That property has a history," one man said as he hurried past. "Better not get involved." When pressed, he just shook his head. That silence alone made me feel more isolated than ever. That night, the harassment intensified. It started with knocking, slow at first, then rapid, echoing across the porch and through the thin walls of the farmhouse. Rusty barked frantically. Alex grabbed a flashlight, peering into the darkness. He swore he saw a shadow move across the yard, then vanish before he could shine the light. A feeling of being watched pressed down on us so heavily that it was almost suffocating. I began noticing signs inside the house, things subtly displaced, a kitchen chair slightly turned, a pillow moved from the couch to the floor. Objects we had clearly placed in order would appear out of place the next morning, though we were meticulous about checking doors and windows. It was impossible to reconcile these changes with the idea of an intruder moving in the house without being seen. Whoever or whatever was doing this was careful, intelligent. One night, as I worked on my laptop in the living room, I heard footsteps descending from the attic. At first, I thought it was Alex checking on Rusty, but when I called out, no one answered. The sounds stopped abruptly. I went upstairs cautiously, flashlight in hand, but found nothing. Just an old coat draped over a chair, untouched. I started recording everything, hoping the cameras would finally capture something. But every time the figures approached, the footage turned to static, distorted in ways that made no technical sense. By the 8th week, I noticed an even stranger pattern. The figures appeared at the windows of the farmhouse at precise times. always around 3:12 a.m. They never spoke, never knocked. They simply stared. Alex tried arguing that it was a game, someone testing our nerves, but I could see the terror in his eyes each time the shadows moved closer. Rusty would hide under the bed, whimpering, refusing to come out even for food. I started leaving lights on in every room, but the figures didn't seem affected. It was during one of these nights that the first direct confrontation occurred. I was upstairs in the master bedroom trying to fall asleep when I noticed a silhouette at the large window overlooking the yard. The figure raised one arm slowly, deliberately, as if pointing directly at me. I froze. Alex woke, rubbing his eyes. We both watched in silence as the figure lingered for nearly 15 minutes before retreating to the tree line. No footsteps, no sound, just watching. After that night, sleep became impossible. Any sound, an owl, a creaking floorboard, even the wind against the siding, sent us both into panic. I started writing down every detail, every odd occurrence. But the more I wrote, the more it seemed like the events were escalating in response, almost as if recording them gave the presence more awareness of us. Then the messages began. They weren't written, at least not at first. Whispered phrases carried on the wind. My name, Alex's name, fragments of conversations we'd had in private. One night I swore I heard someone whisper, "You can't leave!" Alex insisted it was the wind, but I knew better. Rusty barked in a low, urgent tone, his body trembling. A few days later, something appeared in the yard, a line of small, carved wooden figurines. Each figure was posed differently, one crouched, one kneeling, one with arms outstretched. I couldn't recognize the symbols carved into them, but they were familiar somehow, like something I had seen in old books about folklore or dark rituals. We moved them to the edge of the yard, but the next morning they had returned to the same spots, in slightly different positions. We tried to call the police again. This time we even set up motion sensors and infrared cameras inside the house. The dispatcher listened politely, asked the usual questions, but finally said, "We can't send someone out unless a crime is actively being committed. Sounds like you're being spooked by rural life." Their dismissal made us feel powerless, trapped. By the 10th week, the presence was no longer content with remaining in the shadows. One night, Alex woke me in a panic. A man, or maybe more than one, stood on the porch, their faces hidden by hoodies and scarves. One tried the front door handle while the other tapped the windows of the living room. Alex grabbed the baseball bat we kept by the bed, and I called the police. When the officers arrived, the figures were gone, leaving no footprints, no signs of entry. Rusty whined in the corner, still shaking. We considered leaving. Packing the house felt overwhelming, and the thought of abandoning our new home was devastating, but the stress and fear were unbearable. Despite this, something kept us there, a mix of stubbornness and the feeling that leaving would make us powerless to whatever was orchestrating this torment. Around this time, I started noticing that the figures weren't random strangers. Faces seemed familiar, though I could never place them. In fleeting glimpses, I thought I recognized features of neighbors we had passed on the road, local shopkeepers, even people from the small town nearby. But every time I approached them or tried to focus, they disappeared into the crowd or shadows. It was as if someone had carefully selected people who could be invisible, yet still known enough to unsettle us. One morning, I found a single black glove on the porch. Not just any glove, but a child-sized glove, worn and frayed. Rusty growled when I touched it. I took it inside, but the next night, 2 more gloves appeared in the same spot. This pattern continued. Objects left, rearranged, then replaced with other strange artifacts. Nothing was violent, but everything was deliberate. The real turning point came during the 12th week. Alex and I were asleep when we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing across the roof above the porch. We both bolted upright in bed, terrified. Rusty barked furiously. I grabbed the bat, Alex the flashlight. Outside, we saw nothing, but the sound continued for over 10 minutes, moving from one side of the house to the other. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Whoever it was knew the layout of the house. They had studied us. After that night, I started hearing voices indoors, faint at first, barely distinguishable from the wind. "We see you," one whispered. "You can't hide." I began locking everything multiple times, checking doors and windows constantly. The cameras failed again, cutting out at the moments the sounds were loudest. Then came the message carved into the wood of the back porch. "Stay or never leave." Alex nearly had a panic attack when he saw it. We scrubbed it off immediately, thinking it would end the harassment, but the next day a new message appeared, scratched into the siding near the garage. "We are patient." It was no longer a prank, no longer something we could ignore. It was psychological, calculated, relentless. Someone, or something, wanted us to feel watched, powerless, and anxious. We began researching the house more obsessively. Old newspaper articles revealed the previous owners, a couple named the Parkers, vanished in 2008. Their friends said they had been retreating from society, trying to escape threats that never made sense. One neighbor mentioned seeing strange figures around the house at night, like shadows of people who shouldn't be there. The parallels were undeniable. The final weeks before Part 3 would escalate involved the intrusions reaching full-blown direct confrontations. Figures entering the yard, objects being moved in front of our faces, and one terrifying night where the presence enters the house in a way that cannot be ignored. The next few nights were a nightmare. We kept hearing footsteps crunching in the leaves outside. Sometimes it was slow, careful walking. Other times, sudden thuds against the side of the house, like someone was testing the doors or slamming the siding. One night we found the screen door to the garage slightly ajar, though we had locked it. I called the police twice. Both times the officers were polite but dismissive. "It's rural," one said. "You're probably imagining things." But we knew we weren't. Something was out there, and it was getting bolder. By week 3, it wasn't just one figure. On different nights, we saw 2 or 3 people in the fields, always silent, always staring. Rusty wouldn't go near the windows without trembling. I began sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. It was around this time that I noticed something even stranger. In the mornings, small objects would be out of place. The doormat moved, a chair in the kitchen slightly rotated, footprints in the mud that weren't ours or Rusty's. Once, I found a single black feather on the porch. No birds in the area made sense. We started documenting everything. Every night we would check the security cameras. Often, they'd record nothing, just static, as if someone was deliberately interfering. On the nights they did capture footage, we saw shadows moving quickly across the fields, figures disappearing before the camera could fully focus. And then came the whispering. At first I thought it was the wind, but one night while Alex slept, I heard a voice calling my name. "Jessica." It was soft, almost teasing. I froze, listening. Rusty growled low in the hallway. The voice stopped when I turned on the lights. We began to research the house. Old newspaper archives, town records, anything we could find. The previous owners had vanished nearly 10 years ago. No bodies, no leads. The house had stood empty for months before we moved in. Locals called it cursed, but wouldn't elaborate. By the 5th week, the harassment intensified. Figures now appeared at the windows of the upper floor at night. Once, one of them tried the front door handle while we slept, waking us to a loud click. We called the police, but they said it wasn't illegal to look at someone else's property or even attempt a door handle without breaking in. That didn't make us feel safe. We began hearing rhythmic knocking on the walls, always around 3:13 a.m. Sometimes it was a slow, deliberate thump, thump, thump. Other times, it was a rapid barrage, like someone was impatient. Rusty refused to enter certain rooms, whimpering whenever we tried to go in. One night, Alex got up to check the basement. He had left the light on, but the stairs were pitch dark when he descended. He reported hearing low whispers, voices repeating things he'd never said aloud. When he returned upstairs, he was pale and shaking. We considered leaving, but something kept us rooted. A part of me wanted to understand what was happening, to uncover the mystery that had swallowed the previous owners. By the 13th week, the harassment had crossed into something unambiguously dangerous. The figures had stopped lurking in the shadows and were now deliberately choosing moments when we were alone to make their presence known. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary, it was a cage, every window and door a potential point of terror. One night, Alex went downstairs to check on Rusty after hearing him growl at the back door. He found the door unlocked, though we were certain we had bolted it earlier. The screen was ripped just enough to allow someone or something entry without leaving obvious evidence. Rusty barked and lunged, but no one was there. Alex slammed the door shut and bolted it again. That was the first night I truly feared that someone had actually been inside our home. The next day, small, deliberate acts continued. A single shoe appeared at the bottom of the stairs. A chair was turned upside down in the living room. Nothing was stolen, but everything was positioned to send a message. We were here. The feeling of being watched was no longer a phantom sensation. It was real, physical, palpable. We tried to find patterns, but there were none. Sometimes the intrusions happened late at night, other times during the day when we were at work or doing errands. At first, we thought it was a single person, but the differences in approach, in the items left behind, made us question whether multiple people were involved. Whoever it was, they were careful, knowing when we were asleep, when we were distracted, even when we were working on projects in the living room. Then came the scratching. At first it was faint, barely audible, over the wind against the siding. But it grew louder each night, moving across walls, doors, and floors. Alex set up recording devices in every room. When we played back the footage, there was nothing. The scratching was heard but never seen. It was as if the house itself was alive, being manipulated from outside, or perhaps by unseen hands. One night, I woke to Rusty barking furiously at the bedroom door. Alex had fallen asleep, exhausted from the constant fear. I cautiously opened the door, flashlight in hand, and saw a shadow move across the hall. I froze. The figure didn't run. It simply paused, turned, and stared at me from the staircase landing. Its hooded head tilted unnaturally. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to shout. The shadow didn't flinch. Then, as I fumbled for the bat, it disappeared, vanished, into the walls, leaving only a faint echo of laughter. After that night, the intrusions became more audacious. Items were rearranged in the middle of the day while we were in plain view from windows. Notes appeared in handwriting we didn't recognize, cryptic phrases like, "We see everything and you can't hide." One note was placed directly on Rusty's food bowl, another on Alex's laptop. It was no longer enough for the figures to lurk outside. They were forcing us to confront them in our daily life. Sleep became impossible. We began sleeping in shifts, neither of us trusting the other to face the night alone. Rusty, too, was on edge, growling at empty corners and refusing to eat unless one of us was standing beside him. Even during the day, the tension was suffocating. Every creak, every rustle outside the walls felt like a prelude to another intrusion. One evening, we decided to attempt a distraction, leaving lights on throughout the house, playing the TV at high volume, even leaving doors unlocked but observed from inside. Whoever was doing this, though, didn't react in predictable ways. They seemed to enjoy the fear more than any attention we could provide. That night, a series of bangs on the back door escalated into repeated pounding. Rusty barked and lunged, but there was no figure outside. The force of the hits shook the door frame as though someone were inside, attempting to force it open. The next morning, we found the front porch covered in strange symbols, drawn with a dark, wet substance. Some resembled runes, others like crude faces with hollow eyes. Alex snapped photos, hoping to analyze them later, but the patterns made no sense. Whatever this was, it was deliberate. We were being watched, studied, and provoked. We tried involving the police again. This time, we called multiple times, pressed for reports to be taken seriously. Officers arrived, but after examining the porch and interior, they shrugged, offering little more than advice to lock doors and install more cameras. It was disheartening, leaving us feeling abandoned, powerless against someone or something that ignored authority entirely. As the weeks went on, the presence evolved. Figures were now inside the house while we were awake, glimpsed from the corner of the eye, vanishing when we turned our heads. One morning, I found a series of small, shallow cuts along the doorframe to the bedroom. They weren't deep enough to draw blood, but they were deliberate. Whoever had done it wanted us to see them, to feel violated without inflicting immediate physical harm. The psychological toll was immense. Alex became withdrawn, constantly scanning windows and doorways. I jumped at every sound, terrified to even walk from room to room alone. Rusty, usually fearless, started trembling at night, refusing to enter certain parts of the house. The very fabric of our home had been infiltrated by fear. Then came the night that changed everything. I was alone, Alex out at work, Rusty asleep at my feet. Around 2:30 a.m., the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the roof of the porch began. Again. I grabbed the bat and flashlight, heart pounding, and slowly opened the front door. The porch was empty, but written in the frost on the railing were words that hadn't been there before. Tonight, you will understand. I froze, unable to comprehend the meaning. Rusty barked violently, but I was too paralyzed to move. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate tapping from the living room window. I inched toward the room, shining the flashlight. The figure was there, hooded, face obscured, hand raised, tapping rhythmically against the glass. It wasn't a knock or a bang. It was a message. A communication I couldn't decipher, but the intent was clear. Fear, dominance, control. I called Alex, barely able to speak. He returned in minutes. But by the time he arrived, the figure was gone. No footprints, no sound, nothing to indicate how they had entered or left. That night, we didn't sleep at all. By week 16, it became evident that this was not random nor fleeting. The presence was patient, calculating, and intelligent. Objects moved, symbols drawn, messages left, all carefully designed to wear us down psychologically. We realized we were part of a game, one designed to terrorize, isolate, and dominate. We considered leaving permanently, but the isolation of the property made escape complex. Even if we moved, the small town and the surrounding fields offered few guarantees of anonymity. The thought of starting over somewhere else was both exhausting and frightening. And then, just as the 17th week began, something happened that made us question reality itself. One night, we saw a figure inside the house, clear as day, standing in the hallway, its head tilted unnaturally, staring directly at us from a distance of only 10 feet. We called out, but it vanished in an instant, leaving no trace, no sound, no footprints. It was as though it had never existed. After that, we began documenting everything in obsessive detail. Noises, lights, rearranged objects, messages, the behavior of Rusty, every sighting of shadows. We tried communicating with neighbors, but nobody reported anything unusual. It became clear that the presence had specifically targeted us, and not only that, it knew us intimately. The weeks continued in the same cycle. Sightings, symbols, messages, vanished figures. But we also noticed something else. Patterns within the chaos. Every intrusion coincided with moments of isolation, when one of us was alone or when Rusty was not nearby. Every display of direct confrontation ended with disappearance, leaving the house intact, but us rattled. By this point, the experience was no longer about fear of physical harm alone. It was about psychological domination, control, and the slow erosion of our sense of reality, sleep deprivation, constant vigilance, and the unknown intentions of the intruder or intruders were wearing us down. The haunting presence was patient, persistent, calculated, and I knew without a doubt that this was far from over. By week 18, every aspect of our lives was dictated by fear. The house no longer felt like a home. It had become a prison. Each creak, every gust of wind, even the rustling of leaves outside became a potential threat. Rusty refused to leave the living room, sitting by our feet as though he could shield us from the unknown. The intrusions were no longer random. They were deliberate, synchronized, as if the presence was studying us, learning our habits, predicting our movements. One morning, I found a note on the inside of the fridge. You sleep alone too often. It wasn't written in ink, but in a greasy residue that had been smeared to form letters. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message hit directly at our routine. It was personal, intimate, invasive. The next day, Alex set up motion sensors, alarms, and cameras, but the intrusions evolved to counter them. Cameras were moved or covered while we slept, alarms triggered without cause. One night, we woke to the soft tapping of fingernails on the bathroom window. We ran to the window and found nothing. No footprints in the frost, no shadows in the yard, no indication anyone had been there. Yet the sound was undeniably real. One night I went to the kitchen for water around 2:30 a.m. The lights flickered, then died completely. In the darkness I felt a presence, a weight in the air, a cold pressure like someone had entered without a sound. I froze. From the corner of my eye I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. Its face was obscured, but the posture, the tilt of the head, the stillness, it was watching. My breath caught, and I couldn't move. Then just as suddenly it was gone. No sound, no disturbance, nothing but the oppressive silence left behind. After that night, Alex refused to sleep downstairs alone. We slept together, lights on, phone flashlights illuminating every corner, Rusty between us, tense and growling at the shadows. Even so, the harassment didn't stop. Notes were left in drawers, under pillows, inside shoes. One evening I found a small, crudely carved figurine sitting on the windowsill, facing inward. It resembled a twisted, distorted human form. I had no idea who could have placed it there, or why. The psychological weight was unbearable. Every time we left the house, we felt exposed. Every passerby on the street became a potential threat. We avoided walking outside together. We avoided answering the door unless we could see clearly who was there. Alex stopped going to the gym alone. I stopped visiting the library. We became prisoners not just of the house, but of the fear it created in the outside world. Then came the night of the breaking. Around midnight, the living room lights started flickering violently. We ran downstairs to find every picture frame, every decoration, every personal object overturned. Nothing was missing, but the room looked like a storm had passed through. And in the middle of the chaos, a single note. You can't hide. We called the police, but again, there was no evidence, no fingerprints, no forced entry. Cameras captured static as though someone, or something, was actively disrupting them. It was impossible to prove that this was anything other than a prank or a coincidence, but we knew better. A week later, the intrusions became more physical. One night, as I tried to sleep, I felt a hand brush against my arm. I bolted upright. Alex was asleep beside me, Rusty at his feet. The room was empty. The door to the hall, however, was slightly ajar, though we had closed it. Whoever it was had entered without making a sound, moved within inches of us, and left again. That same week. Alex saw something I couldn't. He was sitting in the living room, reading, when he noticed a shadow move across the hallway wall. He froze, watching as it paused, head tilted in that familiar, unnatural way. He called out, "Who's there?" No response. When I came in moments later, the hallway was empty. No footprints, no disturbance, nothing. By week 20, the experiences had escalated to an almost supernatural intensity. Objects moved by themselves, lights flickered without cause, doors opened and closed as if pushed by invisible hands. Rusty, once fearless, now refused to leave the bed. Even the air felt thick, heavy, charged with something unseen. The climax arrived on the 21st week. Around 3:17 a.m., the bedroom door swung open violently, and a figure appeared at the foot of the bed. This time, it didn't vanish instantly. It lingered, head tilted, arms hanging unnaturally at its sides. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Alex bolted upright, flashlight in hand, but the figure didn't move. It didn't even breathe. It simply stared, radiating an oppressive presence that made the air itself feel like lead. Then, without warning, the figure tilted forward and whispered a single word. Alone. We were paralyzed with fear. Rusty growled and lunged, but his teeth passed through nothing. The figure faded into the shadows, leaving behind only the metallic scent of something old, like rusted iron. The next day, we tried to rationalize what happened. Perhaps sleep deprivation, perhaps stress, perhaps hallucinations. But deep down, we knew this wasn't our imagination. Whoever, or whatever, was doing this had a mastery over our environment, over our perception of reality. We stayed awake that day, barricading doors, windows, and any possible point of entry. We left cameras running and recorded every noise, every shadow. For the first time, we caught something on film. A figure, barely visible, moving through the hallway, stopping just long enough to tilt its head toward the camera before vanishing. We realized we couldn't stay in the house any longer. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a matter of survival. We packed our essentials, loaded Rusty into the car, and drove away, leaving the house, the street, even the town behind. We didn't know if leaving would end it, but staying was no longer an option. Even now, months later, the fear hasn't fully subsided. Strange knocks and whispers haunt my dreams. Shadows move at the edge of my vision. Rusty, too, is on edge, always alert, ears twitching at the slightest sound. The presence, or the memory of it, follows us, a constant reminder that some horrors aren't bound by walls, doors, or even distance. We don't know if the figures are human or something else entirely. We don't know their motives, their limitations, or whether they will find us again. All we know is this: the terror, once invited, cannot easily be shaken. It follows, patiently, waiting for the moment when vigilance falters. Even now, every creak, every shadow, every unfamiliar sound is a potential threat. And I've learned the hardest lesson of all. Some experiences aren't meant to end. Some horrors don't leave when you walk away. They stay in the corners of your mind, in the whisper of the wind, in the uneasy feeling of being watched. Always waiting, always patient, always hungry for fear. After leaving the house, we tried to rebuild some semblance of normal life, but the experience clung to us like a second skin. Every time we settled into a new apartment, every new street or neighbor felt tainted by the memory of those endless nights of terror. We became hyper-aware of every creak, every shadow, every stranger. Rusty, once our playful, carefree cat, now leapt at every unexpected sound, ears flattened, tail flicking in anxiety. Even mundane tasks became exercises in vigilance. Grocery runs were stressful. Evenings out meant scanning every passerby for odd expressions, peculiar gestures. We would check over our shoulders, constantly imagining the presence of someone, something, just out of sight. Sleep was fragmented, haunted by dreams of the faceless figures, the tilted heads, the whispers of our names in voices that weren't ours. Months passed. We moved twice more, hoping distance would dilute the terror. But no matter where we went, traces of it lingered. Rusty would freeze mid-step, staring at empty corners. Doors would creak. Shadows seemed to stretch and move differently, as if they were watching us. The sense of being followed never fully left us. I began documenting everything, every unusual sighting, every strange note or object, every instance of what we called the gaze. I hoped that by recording it, we might understand it, or at least rationalize it. But patterns were elusive. Sometimes the intrusions were weeks apart, sometimes days. Always precise, always invasive, always impossible to fully prove. Alex, too, struggled. The sleepless nights, the constant fear, the creeping paranoia, it wore him down. He stopped going out alone. He double-checked locks, cameras, sensors, even our window latches multiple times a day. He refused to let Rusty out of his sight for more than a few minutes. The sense of vulnerability had taken root so deeply that it defined every action. 1. Evening, nearly half a year after we had first fled the house, we received a package. It was unmarked. No return address. Inside was a small black figurine. It wasn't the grotesque jester this time, but a plain, human-shaped carving. Faceless, smooth and cold. We stared at it in horror, immediately recognizing the signature of the presence we had thought we'd escaped. We called the police. They were sympathetic, but unsurprisingly helpless. They told us there was nothing illegal about sending an unmarked object. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no traceable shipping information. It was a reminder that whatever had haunted us wasn't bound by normal rules. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, listening to every distant sound. Rusty sat on the bed, tail flicking, ears perked. Alex kept the lights on, flashlight on the nightstand, phone beside him. We didn't speak, didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly, afraid to attract attention. Weeks later, I glimpsed a shadow from the corner of my eye while reading. It vanished instantly, leaving no trace. Rusty hissed at empty air. I realized then that it didn't matter how far we ran, how many precautions we took, or how much we tried to bury our fears. The experience had changed us, permanently. We started to accept that some things can't be escaped. They are woven into the fabric of our lives, invisible but persistent. We stopped expecting confrontation, stopped searching for a rational explanation. Instead, we learned to live in a state of careful vigilance, always alert, always aware. Our friends and family noticed the change. We weren't the carefree couple we once were. Anxiety was constant. Shadows and noises triggered panic. Rusty's hyper-awareness mirrored ours, a small, furry barometer of our ongoing dread. We became isolated, cautious, protective, haunted, not by what we could see, but by what might be waiting, unseen. I sometimes wonder if it will ever end, if we'll ever wake up in the morning and feel truly safe. But the truth is, the experience has left an indelible mark. It taught us that fear is not just an emotion. It can become a presence, tangible and persistent, capable of following you across miles, through time, into the very corners of your mind. Even now, months later, I glance at shadows differently, notice patterns others might dismiss. Rusty freezes mid-step at the faintest sound, ears twitching. Alex checks locks compulsively, even when he knows they're secure. And I, writing this, can't help but feel the familiar weight of being watched. The house, the figures, the whispers, the tilted heads. They are gone. Or at least we hope they are. But the fear remains. Not as a memory, but as a constant companion. And in some ways, that's worse, because you can leave a place. You can flee the streets. You can pack your bags and move across the country. But some horrors? They aren't tied to geography. They're tied to the mind. And once they find you, they never really let go. We live now in cautious normalcy, but every day is a reminder. Vigilance is survival, fear is a teacher, and some experiences, no matter how much time passes, follow you forever. Even when the world seems calm, we feel it lurking just beyond sight, waiting, watching, patient. And we know that if it ever returns, it will find us exactly where we are.